Hello everyone, and welcome to my review of The Fisherman by John Langan. I'd been wanting to read this book for a very long time, because I'd heard nothing but good things about it, and I'm really excited to talk about the book. So first, a quick synopsis. The book is about two recent widowers who take up fishing as a way to cope with their losses. When one of them finds a mysterious creek to fish at, with a dark history and legends of seeing lost loved ones, they go to find it. But there is a lot more than meets the eye with this creek, as you'd expect. So, with the synopsis, you guys may have guessed that this book is in the horror genre, and you'd be absolutely right. I'd seen this book pop up everywhere on all the best horror books of insert time frame here on just about every site I went to. And as I recall, I even Googled good horror books because I was desperate as heck to find a good horror novel. Lo and behold, this book just kept coming up, so I decided to give it a shot. It had themes that I really enjoy in books, and from the synopsis it really captured my imagination. So I bought it. Although, to be honest, it was really hard to find a copy of this book in my bookstore. I ended up having to buy it on my Kobo, which I don't mind. It's just weird that no bookstores had this in stock. So, overall, what did I think? I thought it was a strong horror novel that falls apart at the end. Not so much that it makes the novel not worth the reading, but enough to make you feel a little sad about it. Let me explain why without getting into spoilers. The reason I was left disappointed at the end was because the book starts off so strong. Like, ridiculously so, to the point where I couldn't put this book down. I normally keep a couple books on the go at the same time, but with this one, I couldn't. This was due to the storytelling. The plot is laid out in a story within a story format, such that a character is relating not only what happened to him, but also what happened to another character. Now, at first I was thrown off when this section started. I honestly shouldn't even call it a section, because it takes up most of the book. But I feel like people should know this going into the book, otherwise they may be really put off by it. If there is anyone into video games watching this, it felt like The Last of Us Part 2, where there's that hard cut into another person's storyline that has very little to do with the main story you thought you were getting. I get why this was done though. The story had to include backstory on what was going on. Also, the events that transpired all those years ago are much more scarier when they are told in this way. It felt like a scary story told around the campfire. It had all the hallmarks of it. Unreliable narrators, not knowing all the details, and very vivid imagery. But it is a little jarring when you're no longer reading about the characters you had expected to read about, or the story you thought you had signed up for. It ends up making the initial characters you meet feel a little shallower than the ones you hear about in the story. There's just not enough character development for them before the end of the book. The character's catharsis at the end of the novel feels a little muted because of it. So I mentioned the imagery earlier, and that is definitely something I wanted to touch on. Horror is wholly dependent on imagery that sticks with you long after you close the pages of the book. It's about giving you enough to form that mental picture in your head, but not enough so that your own imagination can't take over. Everything is always scarier when you can add your own personalized touch of what scares you. Not everyone is going to be the same. And this is where this book really excelled. There are multiple moments from this book that will stick with me for quite some time because of how great they were visualized. Langan really hones in on the subtle details that make creatures or otherworldly beings so creepy. He especially focuses on the eyes, and it really makes the supernatural elements feel all the more alive when he describes them. He is also really great at using suspense and the unknown. Horror is always great when it leaves its monsters till the end, and doesn't give you a whole lot to work off of. It's a real balancing act, because you don't want to overplay your hand or lay it down too soon, as that'll make the rest of the book a total bore. The tension of what is going to happen to the family you meet midway through the book and their little town is the backbone of this story. If it hadn't been as good, I think I would have been bored out of my mind with it. And as for not giving us much to work off of, the lore of this novel is as surface level as it gets. It's very stereotypical and leaves a lot under the surface in terms of motives and world building. You don't know a lot about how things work or why they are the way they are. This didn't bother me too much while Langan was ratcheting up the scares in the flashback story, but this really came to be the book's downfall with its ending. So I'm not going to spoil the ending, and I will try not to be too much of a downer, but the ending of the book was a real bummer. It just sort of fizzled out towards the end and got so convoluted that it was honestly hard to follow what was going on. A few nonsensical things happen, and things happen that should mean a lot, but miss the mark due to their execution. For example, there is something a character is searching for throughout the entire novel that ends up being their downfall in the end. And while this could have been really poetic, it sort of comes out of nowhere, and so much crazy stuff is thrown in around it that it sort of gets lost in the madness. In the acknowledgements section of the book, Langan mentions that this book took a very long time to write, and that it had a lot of iterations. I think that becomes a little more apparent in the latter half of the book, as it struggles to put all the pieces together and find a better ending. So I don't want to end on a sour note or sound like I hated the book. I genuinely liked it. The horror aspects of the novel are good enough for me to highly recommend the novel. The letdown of an ending didn't bother me too much. Stephen King is one of my favorite authors, and we all know that his endings aren't what you pay to read his books for. So all in all, I think you guys should definitely check this book out. It had fantastic scares, the themes of loss and grief were explored well enough, and the characters were interesting. I appreciate whoever is still watching the video. Thank you, and see you next time.